The day started like any other for Agent Lena Mitchell, a black woman who had worked her way up the ranks of the FBI through sheer determination and hard work. She had faced countless challenges over the years: bias, doubts about her abilities, and the pressure to prove herself every single day. But none of that ever stopped her. In fact, it pushed her harder, made her more focused, and shaped her into the agent she had become: confident, sharp, and always in control. That morning, she was on a routine operation, working with a team of officers from a different department. The job was straightforward, or so it seemed. They had to track down a suspect who had been evading capture for weeks. But the moment Lena arrived at the scene, she felt a shift in the atmosphere. There was something different about this operation. Something off. She couldn't put her finger on it just yet, but she was used to trusting her instincts. She knew better than to ignore them. As she approached the team, she noticed one officer in particular, Officer Doug Hall. He was standing with his arms crossed, looking at her with a sort of cold indifference. At first, Lena didn't think much of it. She had encountered all kinds of people in her career, and not everyone was going to like her. But as they began to discuss the operation, something in Doug's attitude became clear. He wasn't just indifferent. He was dismissive of her and of her position as an FBI agent. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" Doug asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. "I mean, we're talking about a pretty dangerous suspect here. It might be better if you just take a step back." Lena blinked, taken aback by the bluntness of his comment. She had heard these types of remarks before, but it still stung every time. She didn't respond right away, choosing instead to focus on the task at hand. She had learned long ago that the best response to ignorance was often silence. But Doug wasn't done. He kept going, clearly enjoying the power trip he was on. "I mean, no offense," he continued, "but I don't think this is really your kind of thing. You're not exactly built for this kind of work." Lena's blood started to boil, but she kept her expression neutral. She had heard worse, but there was something about Doug's words that felt like a direct challenge. She wasn't the type to back down. Not from anyone. Not now. Not ever. Trying to keep her cool, Lena glanced over at the rest of the team. Some of them looked away, uncomfortable with the situation, while others seemed too afraid to speak up. It was clear that Doug had some kind of influence over the group, but that didn't matter. Lena wasn't going to let him or anyone else diminish her worth. With a steady breath, she made a mental note. She would not let this go. Not now. Not when it mattered the most. The tension was building, but Lena was no stranger to challenges. She had faced many battles in her life, both on the streets and in the workplace. And she wasn't about to let this moment be any different. She was here for a reason. She had earned her place, and she wasn't about to let some racist officer, no matter his rank, take that away from her. The operation was about to begin, and Lena knew she had to stay focused. She couldn't afford to let Doug's words throw her off course, but they lingered in her mind like a persistent echo. His attitude was unprofessional, and the dismissive way he spoke to her was a reminder of the challenges she had faced in her career. But this was different. This time, she wasn't going to let him get under her skin. Lena watched as Doug moved toward the front of the team, leading them toward the suspect's last known location. She followed quietly, maintaining her composure. Her mind was racing, but on the outside, she appeared calm and collected, just as she had been trained to be. But beneath that calm exterior, a storm was brewing. She was determined to prove Doug wrong, not just for herself, but for every woman and every person of color who had ever been told they didn't belong in spaces like this. As they moved deeper into the operation, Lena kept a close eye on Doug. He wasn't paying much attention to her now, too focused on the task at hand. But she noticed the small things, the way he often glanced back at her, as if doubting her every move. He was trying to undermine her, trying to make her feel small, but Lena wasn't about to let that happen. The team reached the location of the suspect's hideout, an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Lena's instincts told her that something was off. She could feel it in the air, the weight of the silence around them. The others were tense, but Lena wasn't nervous. She knew how to handle herself in situations like this. The only thing on her mind now was getting the job done. She moved swiftly, scanning the area for any sign of danger. But as they approached the entrance, Doug spoke again, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You sure you're ready for this? This isn't exactly a walk in the park, you know." Lena stopped in her tracks. She wasn't going to let him belittle her in front of the team. She turned to face him, her gaze steady and unwavering. "I've been through worse," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm here for a reason, Doug. I've earned my place, and I'm not going to let you or anyone else make me feel otherwise." Doug blinked, taken aback by her response. He wasn't used to women standing up to him, especially not in a profession where he was accustomed to being the one in control. But Lena wasn't just any woman. She wasn't just any agent. She was determined, resilient, and she wasn't going to let him, or anyone, bring her down. The other members of the team were silent, watching the interaction unfold. Lena could sense that they were uncomfortable, but they weren't saying anything. Doug's bravado was faltering, and for the first time, Lena could see doubt in his eyes. She didn't need to prove herself to him. She knew who she was and what she was capable of. But this moment was about more than just Doug. It was about showing everyone, especially herself, that no one could take away her worth. She had worked too hard to get where she was, and she wasn't going to let anyone, especially someone like Doug, take that from her. The silence stretched between them for a moment, before Doug finally nodded, a reluctant acknowledgement of her strength. But Lena didn't wait for his approval. She turned and continued forward, taking the lead. She was ready. This operation was hers to handle, and she wasn't going to let anything or anyone stand in her way. Lena walked steadily toward the entrance of the warehouse, her mind still focused on the operation, but her thoughts drifting back to her journey. The confrontation with Doug had brought up so many memories, memories of the early days of her career when every step felt like a battle. It hadn't been easy, and there had been times when she wondered if it was all worth it. But now, as she stood here, facing the most difficult of situations, she knew it had been. Growing up, Lena had always known she wanted to make a difference. She had always been drawn to the idea of justice, and when she decided to join the FBI, it wasn't just because of the badge or the uniform. It was because she wanted to help people, to protect the innocent, and to prove that anyone, regardless of their background, could make a real impact. But the world didn't make it easy for someone like her. As a black woman, Lena had to work twice as hard to be taken seriously, to prove her worth, and to show that she was just as capable as any of her male or white counterparts. From the moment she walked into the academy, she could feel the weight of the judgment that came with her skin color. There were whispers, sideways glances, and sometimes even outright exclusion. It was as though some of her colleagues didn't believe she belonged there. But Lena didn't let that stop her. She had worked tirelessly, pushing herself beyond what anyone expected, and she excelled in every test, every assignment, every case. She earned her place, and she made sure that those who doubted her knew they were wrong. The challenges were never easy, but they made her stronger, more determined. She knew that if she kept pushing, she could break down the walls that people like Doug put up. Her journey hadn't been without sacrifice. There had been moments when she had questioned whether the struggle was worth it, whether the toll it took on her personal life, her relationships, and her mental well-being was too much. But every time she thought about giving up, something inside her kept her going. She thought about the people who had supported her, the mentors who had believed in her, and most of all, the people she was fighting for, the communities that needed someone to stand up for them. Lena's determination was also driven by something deeper. She wasn't just proving herself to others, she was proving it to herself. She had grown up hearing stories about people who faced prejudice and adversity, stories about those who rose above it all. Lena wanted to be one of those stories. She didn't want to just be a footnote in history. She wanted to show the world that no matter who you were or where you came from, you had the power to make a difference. As she moved through the warehouse with the team, her focus shifted back to the task at hand. This mission wasn't about Doug's disrespect or about proving anyone wrong anymore. This was about doing her job, making sure the suspect was caught, and keeping the team safe. Her past, her struggles, her journey, none of it mattered in this moment. What mattered was her skills, her training, and her ability to execute the mission flawlessly. But the memories lingered, giving her strength. They reminded her that no matter what happened here, no matter how Doug or anyone else treated her, she had already won. She had made it to this point, and that was something no one could take away from her. Lena moved forward, leading the team as they carefully approached the suspect's hideout. She could feel the tension in the air, a sense that something wasn't quite right. It wasn't just the unsettling silence around them, but a feeling deep in her gut that something was about to go wrong. She kept her thoughts focused on the mission, staying calm, staying sharp. There would be time to reflect later, but for now, she had to be ready for anything. As they reached the entrance of the warehouse, Lena noticed Doug up ahead, scanning the area, trying to take charge. He seemed overly confident, like he was in control, but there was something about the way he was acting that didn't sit well with her. He wasn't being careful. He wasn't paying attention to the small details that could make a big difference. It was as if he thought his position alone was enough to guarantee success. Lena, on the other hand, knew that being prepared and aware of every possibility was what kept you safe and what helped you complete the mission. She approached Doug, her voice steady but firm. "We need to check for exits. Double-check your surroundings. There could be a back door, a hidden escape route, anything." Doug glanced over his shoulder at her, his face twisting in annoyance. "We've done this 100 times, Mitchell. We don't need to babysit each other." Lena's eyebrows furrowed. She could feel her patience starting to wear thin. This wasn't about babysitting. This was about making sure they didn't miss anything that could cost them. But instead of engaging in another argument, she simply nodded. Doug wasn't going to change his approach. But Lena wasn't going to let his carelessness dictate the way she worked. The team spread out, cautiously moving into the warehouse. The large, empty space was eerily quiet, save for the faint echo of footsteps and the occasional creak of old floorboards. It was a stark contrast to the noise and chaos of the operation just outside. Every corner seemed to hide shadows. Every room seemed to hold a potential threat. Lena's training kicked in. She moved with precision, scanning every corner, every object in sight. There was no room for error, not now. As they advanced, Lena noticed that Doug was lagging behind, too busy trying to keep up his tough guy persona rather than being alert. He was still brushing off her earlier comments, no doubt thinking he knew better. But his attitude was beginning to show. He wasn't taking things as seriously as he should, and it was starting to become clear to Lena that his overconfidence could put them all in danger. They approached a series of doors, the most likely spots where the suspect could be hiding. Lena paused, listening closely. She could hear muffled sounds from behind one of the doors. Her instinct told her that this was the moment. They were close. She gestured to the team to be quiet and signaled Doug to move into position. This was the part of the operation where everything could go wrong if they weren't careful. Lena was already several steps ahead in her mind, preparing for whatever might come next. She knew that staying calm, no matter what happened, was her strength. She was in charge of her emotions and her reactions. Doug's bravado, on the other hand, was becoming a liability. But rather than confronting him again, Lena focused on what needed to be done. She gently pushed open the door, taking in every detail of the room, scanning for the suspect or any signs of danger. The warehouse was cluttered with boxes and debris, but the atmosphere was tense. Lena's pulse quickened, but she didn't let the anxiety creep in. She stayed focused, assessing each possible hiding spot with careful eyes. Behind her, Doug was still too slow to keep up with the pace she was setting. His attitude was starting to affect the team's flow, but Lena knew she had to keep moving. She couldn't afford to let distractions break her concentration. This was what she had trained for, and she wasn't going to let anyone or anything take that away from her. The door creaked open wider, and Lena's heart raced. She was close, so close to capturing the suspect. She was ready. Lena's hand hovered over her weapon as she slowly stepped into the room, her eyes scanning every inch of the dimly lit space. She had been in situations like this before, but there was something different about today. Maybe it was the constant underestimation she had felt from Doug, or perhaps it was the quiet realization that she had reached a point in her career where she no longer needed to prove herself to anyone. But right now, there was no time for reflection. The mission was her focus. The room was a maze of old crates and equipment. The only sound was the soft shuffling of her team members, each one moving cautiously, as if they knew they were on the edge of something big. Lena's instincts were sharp, every fiber of her being tuned to the smallest shift in the air. It was almost like a sixth sense, a warning that told her something wasn't right. She glanced over her shoulder at Doug, still trailing behind. He had failed to grasp the seriousness of the situation, but Lena didn't have the luxury of babysitting. She had to lead. "Stay sharp," she whispered to the team. Her voice was quiet but commanding, and it seemed to catch their attention. They respected her. They knew she was good at what she did. Despite Doug's earlier taunts, they followed her lead without question, trusting her judgment. Then, as Lena reached the back corner of the room, she caught a glimpse of movement, just a shadow darting behind a stack of boxes. Her heart raced, but she kept her composure. This was it. The suspect was close. She nodded to her partner, signaling him to cover the other side of the room, and she moved swiftly toward the corner. For a split second, everything seemed to freeze. The silence in the room felt deafening, and Lena's senses were overloaded with the need to act. She could hear her own breath, steady but quick, as she rounded the corner, eyes trained on the figure that was now standing in front of her. It was the suspect, his face marked with surprise, his hand reaching for a weapon. But Lena was faster. In one fluid motion, she had her weapon raised, aimed directly at him, her training kicking in. She spoke with authority, not allowing any emotion to show. "Drop it. Now." The suspect hesitated, his eyes darting between the weapon and the door behind him, trying to decide his next move. He was cornered, but there was still a glimmer of defiance in his eyes. He didn't know who he was dealing with, but Lena knew this was her moment. She wasn't going to give him the chance to make a move. "Don't do it," she repeated, her voice even but firm. There was no room for negotiation. The suspect finally lowered his weapon, his hands trembling slightly as he complied. It was over. Lena took a step forward, maintaining eye contact with him as she secured him in place. She didn't allow herself to feel relief just yet. There was still work to do. The team moved in, quickly securing the suspect and clearing the room. Lena kept her focus on him, ensuring he didn't make any sudden movements. It was only when he was fully handcuffed and escorted out that she finally allowed herself to exhale. But as the operation came to a close, her mind returned to Doug. The man who had doubted her every step of the way was nowhere to be found in the moment of victory. He had stayed in the background, offering no help when it mattered. His arrogance had caused a divide within the team. And now, the results spoke for themselves. Lena didn't feel a sense of triumph. Not yet. There was no satisfaction in proving Doug wrong. She had done what she was trained to do. But there was a quiet strength that came with it. She had stayed calm under pressure, taken charge when needed, and handled the situation with the poise and professionalism that had brought her to this point. She had handled herself well, and that was the victory she needed. As the team left the warehouse, Lena's thoughts shifted. It wasn't about Doug anymore. This was about her, about the person she had become through every obstacle, every challenge. She had proven her strength once again, not through confrontation or anger, but through sheer ability, something no one could deny. She had earned her place, and she had done it on her terms. As Lena and the team finished securing the suspect and clearing the warehouse, the weight of the mission finally began to sink in. It had been a long, tense operation, but it was over now. The suspect was in custody, and the team had followed through without any serious issues. Yet despite the success, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. It wasn't just the fact that they had captured the suspect, it was the way she had handled the entire situation. As they left the warehouse and headed back to the vehicles, Lena's thoughts drifted back to Doug. Despite his earlier remarks, she had managed to carry out the operation with a level of calm and precision that left no room for doubt. She had done her job, and done it well. But Doug, he hadn't been a real part of it. He had fallen into the background, too wrapped up in his own sense of superiority to contribute meaningfully. Lena wasn't interested in petty victories or making Doug feel small. That wasn't the point of the mission. The point had always been about doing the job, doing it to the best of her ability, and ensuring the team succeeded. But seeing Doug stumble had opened her eyes to something deeper. She realized that there was a kind of power in quiet confidence, in knowing your worth without needing to shout it from the rooftops. She had proven to herself, and to everyone around her, that her strength didn't need to be validated by someone else's approval. As the team made their way back to the car, Lena couldn't help but notice the way the others were looking at her. There was a shift in the atmosphere. They had seen her take control, seen her handle the situation with grace under pressure. It was clear that they respected her for it. This wasn't just about her own growth. It was about how she had set an example for the team. She had shown them that leadership wasn't about dominating or belittling others. It was about calm, decisive action and the ability to step up when needed. She caught a few sideways glances from her colleagues, some nodding in approval, others offering a quiet word of thanks. It wasn't much, but it was enough. In that moment, Lena realized that the respect she had been working so hard to earn wasn't just a result of her skills. It was the way she carried herself, the way she navigated difficult situations with poise and professionalism. Lena's thoughts turned to the larger picture. This wasn't the first time she had faced people who doubted her abilities, who tried to undermine her or question her place. But this time, something had shifted inside of her. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone anymore. She had already done that. The respect of her team, the success of the operation, it was enough. The ride back to headquarters was quiet, but Lena felt a sense of calm settle over her. She had walked into that warehouse as just another agent, but she had come out of it something more. She had faced a challenge, not just from the suspect, but from someone who had tried to diminish her value. And in the end, she had shown everyone, not least of all herself, that she was more than capable. She was strong, she was skilled, and she was a leader. As they arrived at the station and began filing out of the vehicles, Lena's mind was already racing ahead. The mission was over, but the work was far from done. She had more to prove, but this time, the proving wasn't for anyone else. It was for her. Every step she took, every challenge she overcame, was shaping her into the woman she had always known she could be. And nothing, not even someone like Doug, could take that away from her. As Lena walked into the headquarters, she felt a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. The operation had been tense, but it had ended successfully. The team had performed well. The suspect was in custody, and she had done her part without letting anyone's doubts or comments derail her. Still, there was a lingering feeling that the day wasn't quite over yet. It wasn't just about the mission. It was about what had happened earlier, the way Doug had treated her, and how she had responded. She passed through the doors of the building, her boots echoing on the polished floor as she made her way to her desk. The sounds of the office, the clicking of keyboards, the low hum of conversations, seemed almost distant now. It was as though everything had slowed down around her, and all she could focus on was what had transpired in the warehouse. Doug's arrogance had been frustrating, but Lena couldn't help but wonder if he realized the full impact of what had happened. Maybe, just maybe, that moment had been a wake-up call for him. She sat down at her desk and started going through the missions report, but her mind kept drifting back to Doug. It wasn't about him, but she couldn't shake the thought that something significant had shifted. Doug had always been so sure of himself, so convinced that his position was enough to make him superior to others. But when it mattered most, when they were in the field, it was Lena who had kept calm under pressure. It was Lena who had handled the situation with professionalism. He hadn't been able to see that, not yet, but Lena knew that deep down he must have realized it. She sighed, pushing the thoughts aside. It wasn't her problem anymore. The only thing that mattered was what she did next, how she continued to move forward. As an agent, she was accustomed to handling difficult situations, but this was a different kind of challenge. It wasn't just about being the best at her job. It was about being recognized for who she was and what she had to offer. And the respect she had earned from her team today was something she didn't take lightly. The door to the office opened, and Lena looked up to see her supervisor, Agent Jackson, walking toward her. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy, always focused on the task at hand, but there was something in the way he approached her that felt different today. "Mitchell," he said, his voice calm but warm. "Nice work today. You handled that situation like a pro. I noticed how you stepped up when things got tense. Not everyone would have done that." Lena smiled slightly, but inside, she felt a surge of pride. It wasn't about the praise. It was about the fact that someone had recognized her efforts, someone who had seen her for who she truly was. She had worked hard to get to this point, and today, her abilities had been the thing that mattered. Not her gender, not her race, just her skills, her judgment, and her ability to lead when it counted. "Thank you, Agent Jackson," Lena replied, keeping her voice steady. "I just did what needed to be done." Jackson gave her a nod, as though he knew there was more to it than that. "Well, you did it well. Keep it up. You've got potential, Mitchell. I've seen it since the first day you walked in here." The words hit harder than she expected. She had always known her potential, but hearing it from someone in authority, someone who had seen her struggle and grow, was a reminder that she was more than just the obstacles she had faced. She was capable, and she was here to stay. As Jackson walked away, Lena leaned back in her chair, her mind clearer than it had been in hours. It was a small moment, but it meant everything. Today had been a turning point, not just in the operation, but in how she saw herself. She wasn't just the agent who had to prove herself every day. She was the one who had risen above all the doubts, who had shown what she was truly made of. The rest of the evening passed in a blur as Lena finished the paperwork and wrapped up her day. But as she walked out of the building, heading to her car, she felt a deep sense of peace. The mission was over. Doug's disrespect was behind her. And from here on out, Lena Mitchell was going to keep moving forward, no matter what. She had already proven everything she needed to prove. Now, she could finally just be herself, and that was more than enough. The next few days passed quickly, but for Lena, they were filled with a sense of quiet reflection. The mission had been a success, but the real shift had been in herself. She had always known she was capable, but something had clicked during that operation, something that made her realize her own worth even more. She no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. Her actions, her decisions, and her leadership had spoken for themselves. At the office, Lena continued to do her job with the same level of precision and dedication she always had. But there was a new air about her, a quiet confidence that came from knowing she had the strength to handle any challenge, no matter the circumstances. The team had seen it in her during the operation, and now they were beginning to treat her differently, respectfully, as a leader in her own right. Doug, too, seemed to be quietly reconsidering his behavior, though he never said anything directly to her. He had always been the kind of person who thought his position made him untouchable, but now Lena knew that he understood something important. Her capabilities were not defined by anyone else's standards. They were defined by her. One afternoon, while Lena was going over some case files in her office, Agent Jackson came by again. This time, he didn't have a mission for her or any official business. Instead, he had something else to say. "Mitchell, I've been hearing good things," Jackson said, leaning against her doorframe. "About your leadership, about how you handled yourself on the field. We're a team, and the way you took charge was exactly what we needed. I know you've had your challenges here, but I want you to know, it hasn't gone unnoticed." Lena looked up from her paperwork, meeting his gaze. She appreciated his words more than he probably knew. It wasn't just the praise, but the acknowledgement that everything she had fought for had led her to this moment. She had earned her place, and now the respect she had always sought was beginning to come her way. "Thanks, Agent Jackson," Lena said with a smile. "That means a lot." Jackson nodded and gave her a small smile in return. "You're not the only one who's been watching. I've heard from a few of the others on the team too. They're starting to see what I've seen in you from day one. Keep at it. You've got a bright future ahead." As he walked away, Lena felt a surge of pride, not because she had finally earned recognition, but because she had always known her value. She had always known that she was capable, even when others doubted her. Now, the people around her were finally seeing it too. The next few weeks were filled with more operations, more moments where Lena's skills and leadership were put to the test. Each time, she felt more certain of herself. She no longer had to prove anything to anyone. She just did her job, efficiently, decisively, and without hesitation. And with each success, she felt her confidence grow. Then one day, after another successful mission, Lena stood at her desk, finishing up her reports when she noticed a familiar face. It was Doug. He was standing by the door, hesitating as though he wasn't sure if he should say something. Lena looked up, raising an eyebrow. "You need something." Doug shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't the type to apologize, but something about the way he had behaved during the operation had clearly bothered him. "I just wanted to say I was wrong about you. I should have treated you with more respect." Lena didn't say anything at first. She wasn't expecting an apology, and she didn't need one. But she appreciated the fact that he had acknowledged his mistake. It was a small thing, but it was enough to show that Doug had learned something. Maybe not just about her, but about himself as well. "I appreciate that," Lena said, her voice calm. "But honestly, I don't need your approval. I know what I'm capable of, and I'm here to do my job. That's all that matters." Doug nodded, a mixture of understanding and relief in his expression. He turned to leave, and Lena watched him go. She didn't hold any grudges. What mattered was that he had learned, and what mattered more was that she had learned too. Lena turned back to her desk, a sense of peace settling over her. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been challenges, doubts, and moments when it seemed like the world was against her. But she had kept going. She had proven herself, not through confrontation or anger, but through her actions, her abilities, and her unwavering belief in herself. She had earned her place, not because she was trying to fit into someone else's expectations, but because she had carved out a space for herself. And now, as she looked ahead, Lena knew that the future was hers for the taking. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same confidence and strength that had carried her this far. Because no matter what, Lena Mitchell was more than ready for